it's not a joke. An atheist and a Christian walk into a theater. And I have a longtime friend who is, in years past, he's described himself as a strong atheist, meaning he's not an atheist just because it feels right, but he's examined the evidence, and that's where he has landed intellectually and rationally. And so we decided we were going to have a dialogue in front of you guys, and there's multiple reasons why a pastor would want to do that. And I know some of you will be disappointed, but it's not Curb Stomp the Atheist Day. People when you and the atheists who listen online will be really disappointed to find out it's not Curb Stomp the Christian Day. That's not the plan. We just believe our society is extremely polarized and people don't talk well, and it's important to demonstrate that people of absolutely diametrically opposed worldviews can actually be friends and actually have civil, rational conversations. And so I wanted to share with you just very briefly 3 reasons why I've asked my friend Abe to be with us today. One is that cognitive dissonance can be an enemy of love. And if you don't know what cognitive dissonance is this idea that when you're presented with something that is contrary to what you believe, it causes discomfort. And so if you're a Christian and somebody says, well, there is no God, something biochemical happens in your brain. There's a little gland called the amygdala, and the amygdala fires and says, warning, warning, run away, run away. And it's actually the same escape mechanism that if a bear came out of the woods. It's the same chemical response. And so we're used to running away when we're faced with opinions different than our own. But how can we love well if we always run away? How can we love people who are different than we are and think differently than we are if that amygdala fires, that fight or flight kicks in and we say, I'm out? Instead, my understanding is it's scientifically proven that you can learn to suppress the amygdala. You can learn to suppress that cognitive dissonance, fight or flight thing that happens in your body. And part of that is by listening. Part of that is by sitting across the table, eating meals with people who think differently than you own, traveling. They say the biggest means of escaping bigotry is to travel well. And so one reason is we want to learn that it's okay to hear other views and to encounter other views without running away afraid. Secondly, we believe that listening is love in action. And a lot of times what we do with people of other worldviews is we dismiss them or we argue in our heads and we never actually hear. So when somebody starts to speak, we're automatically formulating our attack back, instead of just listening and trying to understand who someone is and understanding the best arguments of both sides. And I think it helps your faith when you do that, and I think it certainly helps love when you're able to listen to someone who thinks differently than you do. I used to travel and teach what they call apologetics, which is defending Christianity, so defending the historicity of Jesus, defending the philosophical aspects and the theological aspects of Christianity, and I would be invited to do these conferences and training sessions. And I was at one that was a fundraiser for an apologetics organization. And Abe is my buddy up here, who's going to be up here in just a moment. Hi, Abe. Abe came, and he was attending that thing with me. And I was at a nice table like this. I was in a suit, which none of you have ever seen, I don't think. Maybe some of you have. Weddings and funerals, man, that's when I'm in the suit. But I was in a suit that day, I think, if I remember right, and giving this presentation to a bunch of wealthy people about how do we argue in favor of Christianity. And Abe was seated at the table with me as my plus one. He was my friend from St. Louis that came with me. And started up a really nice conversation with one of the prime funders of this organization. So he's one of the guys that gives a lot of money to this organization that's built on the precept of, can we talk rationally about Christianity, right? And they're having a nice little dialogue, and then finally, somehow through this conversation, Abe says the statement, well, I'm an atheist. And the guy assumed, because he was my plus one, that he would be a Christian there. Obviously, he's an upstanding apologist. He has to be, right? And he's not. He's an atheist, and he's my friend who was there with me. And this is what happened, and it was one of the most shameful things I've ever seen. The guy is sitting next to Abe having this nice conversation. Abe says, I'm an atheist, and his face goes, like there's this shock in his face, and he literally turns in his seat and starts having a conversation with his wife and never addresses Abe again throughout that entire meal. Now, I don't care who you are, you ought to be able to look at that and say something is wrong. Something is off with that. And it restricts love. And the guy experienced cognitive dissonance, right? His amygdala fired, and you literally saw the fight or flight thing happen in him. And it's unhealthy for Christians. And so I think the healthy thing would have been, hey, why are you an atheist? Who are you? Tell me about yourself. Let's be humans sitting next to each other enjoying a meal. But no, cognitive dissonance got in the way. He was unwilling to listen, in my opinion, unwilling to love. And then finally, I want us to learn good, okay? So if somebody says to you, why do you believe what you believe? You can recite all the stuff that you've learned. You can recite all the experiences you've had. But until that has been tested, until some kind of friction has come along and rubbed against it, it hasn't been sharpened like an iron sword. Something happens when you're challenged and you still come out on the other side. And so I'm not afraid of us being challenged in here. For those who've been around for a while, you know our second pillar is study and that no question is off the table. We want to ask the difficult questions, confront the difficult aspects of faith. And in doing so, we think you learn. And as you learn, I think you develop wisdom. And so that's part of the process. And so I'm going to ask my buddy Abe to come up, if you would, Abe. And, yeah. What's up, man?
How you doing?
Good, bud. Abe and I have been buddies since his college experience. My college experience predated his, and I'm old. And he's still a young, strapping lad. But we met through a campus ministry at Murray State and quickly became friends because we had some shared interests in theology and philosophy and such. And then we played volleyball together. We played in a lot of volleyball tournaments together. He's a fantastic volleyball player, an excellent
excellent guy to have on your team. And so,
Hey, why don't you do me a favor? So he's a super smart guy. He's like a judo ninja. There's a lot, or jujitsu ninja.
Yeah.
Just got his doctorate. I'll let him tell you about who he is and what he does. But Abe, why don't you just say hi, would you?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me today. It's probably been, I don't even know how long. Abby asked me a few minutes ago, like, when was the last time you were in a church on Sunday? And I honestly cannot even remember. I mean, I'm sure it's been at least 5 or 6 years, but I can already tell being here today that this church is different. We're in a movie theater.
Did you get popcorn?
I didn't get popcorn yet, but I will. And I like this place. I like the vibe here. This is, if I was going to come back, I mean, this would be the kind of environment that I would want to come to. As far as me personally, I guess I should say, so H mentioned that I just finished school, and that's true. I'm about a week from graduating. I'll have my PhD in bioethics from St. Louis University. And thanks. Yeah. And that's a really interesting job that I'm looking forward to doing. Basically, I'll do 2 things. One thing that I'll do is I'll work in a hospital. I'll actually be in a hospital, and whenever ethical dilemmas arise, they call ethics. There's actually a department called ethics, and someone will go and try to help the parties disagreeing with one another, like, figure out what to do in these situations. So I'm about to move to New York, and I'll do that in New York for the next year as kind of like an apprenticeship. And then the other thing that I do is I argue with people about bioethics questions in academia. So I talk and I teach and I write papers and do things like that. As far as life outside of that, yes, I do jujitsu. So I can choke you with my foot. I can choke you. I can
Choke you in many ways.
I can do things to your body that will hurt. Yeah, so I do that like in my spare time in St. Louis. It's actually not as like violent as it sounds. The gym, like where I train, like the people there are really great, and that's been awesome to do. And yeah, I've also served in the Peace Corps for a few years. So I did that between my time at Murray and my time in St. Louis. So I lived on an island with a tribe of people. Basically, I have like a tribal name, and I fished, and they made fun of me because I was really bad at it for 2 years. So I would always catch like the tiniest fish, and my host mom would like find a way to cook them and eat them anyway. So anyway, I could keep going, but
So two questions. One, give us an example of a bioethics dilemma that you might face, just something brief. And 2, you're headed to South America again here pretty soon, or
Yeah.
for the first time, South America.
For the second time going to South America.
Talk about
Suriname,
that just
South
for a second.
America. So my cousin lives down in Suriname, South America, and I want to, take some time away between the PhD and going to New York. So, yeah, I'm going down there, and it's going to be weird, I hope. I like weird things. And there's a religion down there called Winti that I had never heard of before, and it's like this amalgamation of different tribal religious beliefs from Africa that were brought over by the slaves and kind of coalesced into this religion called Winti. So I'm going to study that basically, and I'm especially interested in how that affects decisions they make in the hospital, especially with their kids in the pediatric context. So I'll kind of do that, and then I'll also, like, I don't know, just see Suriname again, which is a beautiful country.
So how about an ethical dilemma? What's something you might get called on, just briefly?
Yeah, so an example of something. So usually ethics gets called when, like, our protocols for things get broken or frustrated in some kind of way, and it's like we don't really know what to do. So, like, for example, I was telling you about this the other day. Like, if a patient comes in, this has happened before, no family, no identifying information, and he's in the ER, and he, like, codes or something, and the medical team, opens his shirt to, like, administer CPR or whatever, and he has a tattoo on his chest that says, "Do not resuscitate." And it's like, what do we do? Like, is that a request from this patient? Is this a serious request?
Is it a band name?
Is this a band name? Is this a joke? Is this, like, what do we do in this situation? So, like, that's, like, just what's coming to my mind right now, like the kind of strange thing that can arise in the clinic that ethics would then get involved in.
Gotcha. So when I first talked about doing this, Abe and I have talked about just getting up, because we have these conversations that I wish we could record that are just stellar, and we talk for hours at a time sometimes. And I always find them fascinating. Abe is a super smart guy and a super deep thinker. And when I called him, my initial plan, it wasn't curb stomp the atheist or vice versa, but it was that we would hash it out, because sometimes in our conversations we do. We'll say, well, why do you believe this? Well, I believe it because of this. Why do you believe this? And that happened. We haven't done that much this weekend, but sometimes in the past we have. And I said, how about this? I said, I'll submit a couple questions to you that I would like you to answer. You submit a couple questions to me, and then I'll submit a couple questions I'd like you to ask me, and vice versa. So I was thinking 4 questions we would tackle. Abe said, that sounds like a terrible idea, kind of. And yeah. I agreed with him. And he said, how about this? He said, how about we just be really brutally transparent? He said, how about if you talk about the doubts that you have about your faith, and I'll talk about the doubts that I have about my worldview, and we'll just be vulnerable in front of people and let it fly and see what happens. And I thought that was outstanding. I've never heard of that done anywhere before. And so that's the route we chose to go in this conversation. And first we wanted to talk about some of the areas we agree and that we have in common. And obviously one of those areas is we're both extremely handsome and hilarious. And so it starts with that, right? So we were drawn to each other and became friends quick. I think for me with Abe, it was that we had a common ground of wanting to explore questions that most people ignore. From the very beginning when we met each other, questions of faith and reality and existential questions and philosophy were all we talked about almost, unless we were playing volleyball together. We got together. We would get together weekly and talk for a couple hours a lot of times. Yep. And it was about those difficult questions. Why should I believe? Why? What about this evidence against belief? What should I believe about philosophy and so forth? Can you think of other stuff?
Well, I mean, I think it's also interesting to note that at the time, I myself was a very strong believer. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was, that was around the time that we met. Now, I was starting to have, like, questions and things like that, but I mean, I had a kind of radical conversion experience mm-hmm. while I was at Murray. And I mean, like, I used to sleep with a cross, mm-hmm. like, and walk around with, like, Bibles in my pocket. I mean, I was, like, super into it. Mm-hmm. So I just think that's an important part of the story, too. Like, I haven't always been this way. I haven't always been in this decrepit state. No, but yeah, I mean, that's that's the kind of thing that I think surprises people. I mean, most of my friends that I have believe, like, wildly different things from me. And I went to school, St. Louis University is a Jesuit institution, and I go to take bioethics classes with Jesuit priests and theologians. And I mean, it's always been something that I'm drawn to, is people that, think very differently from me, because even deeper than that, we have a lot of these things in common, like a desire to even talk about these things in the first place. So,
and it seems like, at least my experience with you, and I hope this would be reciprocal, is that neither of us have ever really gotten offended with one another. It doesn't
right.
Like we never all right, man,
Yeah.
choke me out. I know
Right.
you're going to, but let's make it happen, right? That's never happened.
Yeah.
It seems like we've always been able to have these dialogues openly and
For sure.
no matter what we were talking about. So I appreciate that a lot about you. Anything else you want to add to that before we move on a little bit?
Well, I don't. I think so. Now, actually, go ahead. I
Okay,
might save it.
so we talked about getting in front of you guys and being just brutally honest. And Abe said yesterday, he was checking in on me a little bit because he said, you were. Excuse me. Excuse me. He said, I've come prepared to cut deep. He said, I'm going to be honest. And I think he was fishing, are you going to be honest? And I had already planned to be pretty honest. And so some of the, probably odds are today, as a group of Christians in here, are predominantly Christians, the stuff I'm going to have to say is going to strike home a whole lot more than what Abe will have to say. Because he's going to be talking about his worldview of atheism and where he maybe finds fault or finds difficulty or finds it challenging. And I'm going to talk about it as a Christian. And a lot of people never want to hear that kind of stuff from their pastor. They want the pastor to be the guy with the halo that never misspeaks and never missteps and always has it all together. And I heard a quote from, I think it was Maya Angelou. Is it Angelou? Angelou. Angelou. That's what I said, Angelou. Maya Angelou. And she said recently something like this: I dread the day when the whole world discovers I'm a fraud. And that's her speaking, this world-renowned author and person who's made a huge impact on society. But she feels that, and I feel that pretty often. And Abe and I were talking about it this weekend, and he feels that. And I suspect all of us, in some sense, feel that way, that we're not just totally transparent and open where people see the actual us, but that we have to put on some kind of mask or some kind of face. And we just agreed that we're not going to do that today. So I'll start with one, and then we'll bounce back and forth. Does that sound fair?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead. You got something else?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say one thing. So I wanted to say something really quick about the kinds of comments that I'm going to make today, right? So when we argue about or give reasons for why we believe things, there are different categories of reasons that we give. And one category of reasons is, I might say, H, you should believe something because it's true. Okay? And that's oftentimes how we would exchange in a dialogue like this, right? But a second category of reasons that we can give is about the consequences of believing something. And specifically what I mean usually there is like the psychological consequences of believing or the social consequences of believing something, right? So it's that second category of reasons that is actually going to be what all the four things that I'm going to talk about today fall into. So they're not so much like concerns that I have about the truth, even though I have those concerns. That's just not what I'm going to be sharing today. The concerns I'm going to be sharing today are like, hey, here's this thing I believe, and here's four things about it that are really psychologically difficult for me to handle.
I think I'm in the same camp. Mine are more emotionally difficult to handle.
Yeah.
Like I've rationalized and thought it through, and so these categories that I'm going to bring up are areas that I feel like I could do a seminar on pretty easily and present my case for. This is why this isn't a problem for the Christian faith, but I still feel them, like they still haunt me. And so I'll just kick it off right now. A strong argument against Christianity and the Christian God, in my opinion, is pediatric cancer. It's 2 words. You just throw it out there and say, kids across the planet have cancer. Where is a good, omniscient, omnipotent God? And to me, that question and that turmoil. So I feel like if we needed to, I could do 6 weeks on answering that question rationally. I feel like I could say, well, here's why, philosophically, empirically, and so forth. We could say, this is why the world is as it is. But that doesn't mean it feels right. Like there's this emotional disconnect in me that, so we have a friend, Doug Fisher. And Fish, his nickname is Fish. Everybody calls him Fish. And he's been in the hospital all week because their baby, the placenta detached from mom, and the baby went without oxygen for an unknown amount of time. And so then the baby was a C-section?
Emergency C-section.
An emergency C-section. Right. And then there's these days of the baby being comatose, wondering, is there even a brain left? I mean, there's no way of knowing how long this baby was without a supply of oxygen, right? And
hold on.
Yes.
And had she said, in that moment. If the doctors had gone in and said, we need to do an emergency C-section to save this baby, and had she said, well, on second thought, I don't really think I want this baby, so I'm going to refuse this C-section, then they would have called ethics. Like, that's just another,
those are the kind of things
that's,
you-
yeah, that's
right.
like, and then I'd be like, well, I don't know. No, but yeah, that's the sort of things that
Right.
the ethics would get involved
Right.
in.
So,
Just as
so they
another
decided to
example.
do the emergency C-section, and the baby was born, and they actually got results from an MRI a couple days ago that show everything is pretty normal, and it's looking really good. But and that's the response is thank God or wow, I'm glad. But had the results been different, which happens every day across the planet, it would just be natural to say, God, where were you? I remember the second miscarriage my wife and I had, weeping in the room next to the sonogram. Is that what we're using? Use a sonogram to see no heartbeat. The heartbeat flatlined. And I remember leaving the room and sitting there just saying, God, you've got to help us. You've got to help us. Because we've been trying and trying and crying and crying and praying to have another baby. And it flatlined. First time, beep, 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 everything, joy. Second time, flatline. And there's this, and I can rationalize that. I can easily get up here and talk about logically why I believe that makes sense in the world that we live in and that Christianity comes out unscathed, but I don't feel it. What I feel is something's wrong. Where were you, God? I don't understand why you don't answer prayer sometimes. I don't understand how we can live in a world. There's skin conditions where kids basically, their skin melts and they're in constant agony, and all they can do is wrap them in bandages and hope they can exist as well as possible their whole lives. And that's the world we live in. And so that haunts me. It has shaped my spiritual journey tremendously. It has shaped my theology. It's shaped how I interpret the Bible. It's shaped a ton the disconnect I have between the rational side and the emotional side on the topic of specifically kids suffering. But suffering in general, obviously, is a huge, huge thing. It's tough.
Yeah. And I mean, so is it my turn?
Yeah, this is just a conversation, man.
So kind of on that note, I mean, I think, so as H said, I'm an atheist. I would consider myself to be a naturalist. I would also use the word humanist. Those would be words to describe, things that I think are most likely to be true. But, again, I'd say given those beliefs, one psychological consequence, so if we're talking about that second category of reasons, is death, and kind of building off of that. And so I tried to put my 4 reasons and have each of them begin with the letter M to help make it memorable, I guess. So the first one is mortality. Mortality, it's a very difficult thing for me to deal with. I mean, I think that when I die, that's it. And that's not the worst part. The worst part is thinking when my friends and family pass away, I will never see them again. I believe that, and it hurts bad. And there's no recourse on my worldview to do much about that. I mean, that's just a pain that I just have to sit with and deal with somehow, and it can really be devastating sometimes. Luckily, in my life, I haven't lost anyone too close to me yet. But that's not true. There is one exception to that. Yeah, and I don't know. It's something I don't have a good answer to, and I don't think is a great answer is really available within my worldview. One thing that I do think about sometimes, I remember this quote, and I don't know who said it, but they said, most of us who don't know what to do with this life want another one that will last forever. And that really kind of hit me, and so I've just tried to focus on just filling this life then, and just not focusing on the afterlife and death. So, yeah.
Let me take a moment and just point out how special this moment is. First off, if Abe had asked me to come in and sit in a room full of 100+ atheists and chat with him, I would have been nervous as all get out about that. And I just want to say...
I'm pretty nervous.
I just admire Abe for saying yes to this moment. There's not a lot of people that have suppressed cognitive dissonance enough where they can actually do this kind of thing. And I think, hopefully, seeing your pastor do something similar is special, but to see an atheist talk about that specific topic, I've never heard an atheist confess that before. I've heard atheists that are naturalists talk about that's all there is. We're food for worms once it's over, but never be honest about like the emotional repercussions of that. So thanks. Just want to say thanks for being straight about that. You want to go with another one, or you want me to?
I mean,
I think you got 4 and I got 2.
have 4.
So,
all right, so
right.
I'll do, okay. The first one was mortality. The second one, I would say, is morality. And what I mean by morality is, been like one of the great intellectual mysteries of my life has been trying to understand what this thing is called ethics and how we justify the moral claims that we make. And, in the absence of a divine being to ground those statements, it's a real puzzle. And it's, it's something that there is not a lot of agreement about, and actually makes doing what I do or will do for a living quite frustrating, but also very, exciting all at the same time. But yeah, I mean, just this question of what is morality in a world without God? What are these moral intuitions that I feel so strongly about things? Where do they come from? Why should I care about the moral intuitions that I have over the moral intuitions that, Hitler had or anyone else has? And it's a struggle. It really is. I mean, my answer to that, at least partially, is going to appeal to something about evolution and evolutionary psychology and how a lot of the moral intuitions that we have, we share with other organisms, and we have them because they served evolutionary utility, right? But notice that's a totally different explanation for where they come from, because I say nothing about moral truth or statements corresponding to a moral truth. No, I mean it's drives that we have that are the products, not solely, but a lot, to a large extent, the products of evolution by natural selection. Yeah.
So my second category is probably the most painful for a group of Christians, and it's the fact that Christians can be pretty awful to one another and to society, and have been consistently throughout history. I've always said that if I were an atheist, I would hammer that point. So Christianity espouses a gospel. Like the good news of the gospel is news of transformation. It's like you can start over in life. You can be more like God. You can do away with what is nasty and ugly about you and be risen to something new. Baptism is symbolic of that, is going down to die and being raised back up to life. And I think history, and this is an intellectual, it's empirical, like we talked about yesterday. It's you can empiricize this and show that statistically chaos in the lives of Christians is pretty much comparable to chaos in the lives of the non-religious. There isn't a big change. There's a lot of very moral people out there that are Buddhists and atheists and Hindus and so forth. Many that, in my opinion and in my experience, so anecdotal evidence in my life says that Muslims are way more hospitable than Christians ever thought about being. That's just been my experience consistently, constantly across the board. And so I'm haunted by this idea. And as a pastor, you get to see the best and the worst of people. And and people can be mean. I mean, people can be absolutely heartless. And sometimes not even meaning to be. I had somebody approach me a while back after a service, and this person said, "What has happened to you? Your sermon was really good today." Which I thought, how do you respond to that, right? And it was my wife. Yeah, that's it. Every week she's like, "I think you might be onto something here. I never dreamed it." No, and my experience has been that Christians talk a lot about serving others, but actually feet on the floor doing something, we'd rather watch football in general. And so that's something that haunts me and I think drives me. And we'll talk in a second about ways that we cope with these things. But you don't have to look far. Look at the Crusades. Look at the literal torture of LGBT people. Look at women's rights and specifically slavery. Holy smokes! I mean, it was Christians that helped fight and emancipate and end slavery to a certain extent, but it was also Christians propagating it and being slave owners from the very beginning and saying we have a right because the Bible tells us we have a right. And biblical interpretation led to awful treatment of other human beings. And so the suffering thing and just the fact that a lot of Christians are buttheads, those are the two things that haunt me and really, really challenge me a lot. And challenge me personally is I want to break through that mold in both areas. I want to help alleviate suffering. I want to learn a theology that deals with suffering well, and I want to be nice. I want to be nice to people. I want to be compassionate and merciful.
Yeah, so I've talked about mortality, I've talked about morality, and now I'll talk a little bit about meaning and mind as things that also disturb me, right? So on meaning, it's just us, right? Like it's just like, what is the purpose of my life? Like it's me just trying to do things that I think will be insightful and helpful to other human beings. It just doesn't become transcendent or anything beyond that. And that can be really hard. Like, for example, I'm about to move to New York, and I'm going to leave my whole life behind in St. Louis. And I have no sense that I'm on a path that I should be, that's like been set out in front of me, or that there's like something, cosmic that like has my back in this process. It's just a risk that I'm taking. And I'm like risking, not everything. People take much bigger risks, but it's just it's a stressful thing, and I'm going up there and I'm just going to try to make it work. I don't even know whether studying bioethics was the right decision. It's just like what I ended up doing. I think it was right. I was telling H about this. This does not happen very often. But 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting in my bed at night, and I had this feeling like I used to feel of like God, like just like being there. And I was like, this is amazing. It was so different from my day-to-day feeling. And it reminded me, even just for a moment, what that used to be like. And that feeling and that sense of meaning and purpose that I used to have with a theistic worldview is something that, although I was reminded of it a few weeks ago, is something that in my day-to-day life is, completely absent. And it was just so stark, the contrast, in just those few moments to have that reminder. It is a really big psychological difference to have between these two worldviews, in the idea that there's a being who loves me unconditionally and has a plan for me and wants me to be here, and it's like, my God. And then the last one, mind. So I teach what's called a neuroethics class at St. Louis University, and in that class we talk a lot about neurotechnologies that are kind of coming on the horizon that will allow us to do all sorts of bizarre. You thought bioethics was weird, up till now, cloning and CRISPR and stuff like. The sort of things that are on the horizon in terms of the brain and technology are just unbelievable. Like, if any of you have seen Black Mirror, we really aren't, we could be doing a lot of these things in the next couple of decades. But it makes me think about my brain a lot, and my mind, and what it is, and what is the relationship between my mind and my brain. And at the end of the day, I think I'm just a machine. And there's just no way for me to make it anything other than that. Any way for me to parse it differently. And I'm a silly machine too. It's not just that, like, I'm a machine. It's that I also think that, like, I'm a machine that's very, like, poorly made in a lot of ways. I can't remember where my keys are half the time. I dress poorly. My hair, there's just lots of chaos in my life because I'm a silly machine, right? But I just kind of bounce around and do the best that I can. But there's a lot of reasons, philosophical reasons, why that belief would be significant, right? And one of them being, I just see my mind as not something that's like actually free to, I don't believe in free will. I mean, I just don't. And I've tried to see like the way that naturalists, that they have this position called compatibilism, so they don't have to say they're a determinist, but they're like totally a determinist. But anyway, and I just, that's really weird. Actually, just a lot of the time, just to like think that way, that I couldn't actually have done anything different than I did, and that's just bizarre, and has a lot of implications that I don't really know how to handle a lot of times, like especially in terms of like blaming people for things. Because I think you all are silly machines too, right? I don't think I'm the only silly machine in here, right? So it's not only for me, but it's like, what does that mean in terms of when I think someone's done something wrong or something well, and when I tell them that, like, does that even make sense on the silly machine hypothesis?
So we're running out of time pretty quick.
Oh,
How
okay.
close are we? I don't have my glasses on. Is it 10:58? Yeah. Oh, man. So give me the 18-second version of how you deal with these things.
Yeah, so here it is. It's not, so in terms of the morality, meaning, and mind, the kind of things that I'm saying I feel like I've lost in a lot of these contexts is objective morality, objective meaning, and mine's a little bit different. But essentially the way that I deal with it, not deal with it, but that I've come to think of it is like, it's not so much that I have lost these things, it's that I've come to realize that they were never possible to have to begin with. And part of the insight for that is that I feel like if I were God, I would be sitting around having all of these same thoughts. If I were God, I would be like, well, is it just me in the universe? Is morality just what I say it is? And I'm like, damn, like I gave these problems to him to solve. And so I don't have to, worry about him anymore, but I feel like if I were him, I would have a lot of these same concerns.
Which would be a wonderful segue into like a 15-week seminar to talk about those things, and we don't have time for that today. For me, reconciling my faith with the two topics that I brought up is primarily rational. I feel really confident in the rational arguments I have that make sense, put these in categories and work. But on the emotional side, I've seen Christians sacrifice greatly to alleviate suffering. I've seen it a lot. And I think it can be empirically shown that Christians have kind of paved the way and led the way on a lot of humanistic efforts. Humanists are doing a lot, but I think historically, hospitals built, educational facilities and so forth, historically Christians have paved the way. And so I'm proud of what Christians have done to alleviate suffering. And I've also known a lot of Christians that aren't buttheads. Like I've known people that in the closet have done really like crazy sacrificial, magnanimous things to help fellow human beings that no one else ever knew about. Like there was no other motive other than some kind of warmth in their heart towards their fellow human beings. I've seen extremely, like I know a guy who beat a guy with a baseball bat because he was flirting with his girlfriend, went to jail for months, and has become a Christian now. He's a pastor. And you would never, ever dream that he had a violent tendency in his body. He's just the most compassionate, merciful person you'd ever meet. And I've seen that pretty consistently as well. So when I think about historically Christians paving the way towards atrocities, I also anecdotally get to look at some of the really neat stuff that you guys are doing, the phone calls that I get from some of you about how you're touching lives and making a difference. I see Molly Bond up here shaking her head, and Molly lost a child years ago, and her church, she didn't have to cook a meal for 2 years after that. I mean, that's outstanding compassion. That's most people who go through trauma, 6 months later, everybody's forgotten, and people cared. And I can look around the room and see some of you. I see Bridget nodding her head and know some of the stuff she's been through. So there's a lot of hope attached. So it's this like dichotomy between me of Christians are really nasty and Christians are really amazing. And Christians really amazing wins out in me most of the time. I want to close with this one idea. Jesus was asked one time, what is the path to eternal life? And somebody said, how do you get there? And they said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And anybody know what he said? He said, what do you think? He asked the questioner, what do you think? And the guy said, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, well done, that's the answer. And then the guy, it says, wanting to justify himself, says this question, says, who is my neighbor? Because he's trying to figure out, who do I actually have to love, right? That's the question from this good, God-fearing Jewish person is, I don't have to love that guy, right? And Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he starts, it says a man was taken by thieves and dropped in a ditch and left to die. And these good religious folk walked on by and just ignored him because they had Bible studies to get to. They just ignored him and said they didn't have time for that. And then he says these words. He says, but a Samaritan. Now, we've heard the Good Samaritan so many times that we think, wow, the Samaritan was great. He's the hero of the story. That's not what this good God-fearing Jew heard. What he heard is that pagan, that heathen, that unbeliever, that irreligious person stepped in and made a difference. And in the end of the story, Jesus says, be like the Samaritan. That's how he ends it up. He says, you go and do likewise. Do what the Samaritan did. So somebody asked Jesus, what's the path to eternal life? The answer is love. Who am I supposed to love? He says, be like that pagan over there. Be like that non-believer over there who stepped in and was willing to be humanistic, who was willing to serve his fellow man and engage a person who was totally opposed to him religiously, socially. They were enemies. And that was Jesus' answer to, how do I inherit eternal life? And so I know we don't have any more time. Let me mention this while it's on my mind. So Abe and I talked about him feeding me a list of objections that we could cover over the next few weeks. The whole time leading up to this, that just hasn't felt right. It hasn't meshed with him or me. We're ditching that plan entirely and not going with that over the next few weeks. Mother's Day is next week, and somehow conquering something existential or cosmological just didn't feel right at all, so we were going to skip it anyway. So next week for Mother's Day, I feel really inclined to talk about the difficulties of being a mom and some of the challenges that moms face and some of the regrets that moms whose kids have already grown and gone or that they carry. And we're just going to talk about how great moms are. And so next week will be a great time to bring any moms that you know, and we're going to relate that to every human being, that every human being deals with struggles and every human being deals with shame and so forth. So that's the plan. And then I've got 2 weeks left after that I may look at some atheist objections and talk about, but it's going to go a different route. It just didn't feel right. But my hope is today that you guys learned that it's okay just to sit with a friend who's an atheist and actually be friends and be human together and enjoy one another. B, that you don't have to be afraid. Think about it. You can ask. Now you've learned that you can ask an atheist, what are your chief doubts about your faith? You don't have to say, hey, let me plant doubts in you. Let me hammer you. All of us come with doubts. All of us have questions. All of us are humans that are facing difficulties. And it's good and healthy and loving to listen and to face off with people that don't think the way you do.